Welcome, everyone out there in listener land. I'm Kerry Cadambi, and you are listening to A Spirited Exchange on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with us for the next hour for an engaging conversation, inspiring you to awaken and live into your true and highest potential. Every second and fourth Wednesday at 4 p.m. PST, Pacific Standard, on A Spirited Exchange, we bring you inspiring guests, engaging in stimulating and mind-opening discussions, helping you to awaken, heal, and reveal your highest purpose. Today, I'm glad to have with us Gayathri Ramprasad, a mental health advocate. She's the founder and president of ASHA International, a nonprofit organization dedicated to normalizing conversations about mental health and inspiring hope and healing, one story at a time. Gayathri is also the author of Shadows in the Sun, Healing from Depression and Finding the Light Within, her autobiography. And by the way, she's going to be giving away a copy of her book today. So if you would like to be the lucky caller, the lucky receiver, be sure to call in at the number 1-800-930-2819. And we'll give that number out again soon, 1-800-930-2819. Let's welcome Gayathri Ramprasad to A Spirited Exchange. Hello, Gayathri.
Hi, Kerry. Delighted to be with you.
I'm thrilled that you're here with us today. We're going to talk today about cultivating your mental well-being. And considering we're in the midst of this COVID pandemic, developing some self-care practice to support a healthy state of mental well-being is important now more than ever. And Gayathri, you've graciously agreed to share with our listeners 3 things that you've found effectively help you cope at this time of COVID. And I think our listeners are really going to find this information easy to apply and very helpful. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about you and your story, how you got to where you are today. So I've known you for more than 20 years. Our kids went to the same school, and we were neighbors for a number of years, which was really delightful. It was so nice. And in that time, I've watched how you have artfully navigated from that place of pain to inhabiting a state of inner strength and purpose. And you have an incredible heart for helping others by sharing the lessons that you learned in that pain to give hope and healing to others who may be struggling with mental health conditions. So, Gayathri, would you share your story with our listeners?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that kind introduction, Kerry, and the welcome. Thank you. And yes, it was an incredible joy to be a neighbor and a blessing to be a friend for a couple of decades now. So
yeah, and hopefully a few more.
Yes, looking forward to it. So thank you. Happy Mental Health Awareness Month. This is May. You know, like many people around the world, I grew up in a family where we did not talk about mental health. We weren't even aware about it, forget talk about it. So it wasn't until I was 18 years old that my idyllic childhood began to crumble. And at that point in time, at 18, I was so full of confidence and promise that I was going to make my dad's dream of becoming a doctor come true. I believed I had aced through school, so I believed I was on my way to med school. My dad had wanted to become a doctor and had never had the opportunity. And so I was so proud of myself that I was going to make his dream come true. And then I remember going to check my reports, after the finals. And there on the bulletin board is how results were announced after our finals in colleges in India back then. In red ink next to my name was the word failed in red ink. And I remember staring at that bulletin board, my heart pounding, thoughts racing, becoming nauseous and disoriented, and my whole world just falling apart, not able to understand how I could have done so well for so long and just failed all of a sudden. Now I know years later that that was the beginning of my panic attack. Back then, as an 18-year-old, I had no understanding of what was happening to me, and neither did my family. They try to comfort me and tell me that, it's a fluke. We're going to talk to the principal and, have this corrected. And as it turned out, there was a boy in my class who wanted me to be his girlfriend. And because I had no interest, this was his revenge, he said. He had bribed the registrar and made me fail. And to make things worse, he threatened to rape me every day that I went to college. Again, growing up in a culture like India, where as a girl, first of all, as a young woman, I had so little voice and agency, I had no way to cope with what was happening to me, and neither did my family. Of course, I never told about the rape threats, to my parents because, I knew what my mother would say, and she had on many occasions before told me that look at the way you dress. If you want the world to treat you better, you dress better. You don't go out there with short hair and miniskirts and jeans and expect to be treated with respect. So it was a really difficult time in my life, and with especially with absolutely no understanding of what was happening to me, it was even harder. And over the weeks, I began to withdraw. I couldn't, eat or sleep or think or function. And my, parents did take me to my family physician, who checked me out and said I was just being a drama queen, just a typical teenager going through a phase. And tough love is what he prescribed. And tough love is what my parents doled out. Not that it helped me heal, or not that it helped ease their worries about how I was deteriorating by the day. Somehow I managed to graduate, and my mother decided it was time for me to get married. And she found me a boy of her dreams and the man of my dreams today after 37 years of marriage. But nonetheless, as my whole family was getting ready for the wedding and thrilled, excited, I would be on the sidewalks of Bangalore, my hometown, puking my guts off,
Mm.
just completely debilitated by panic attacks. And so I don't know if I was a blushing bride. I always tell my girls, I sure was a barfing bride. It was hard. It was hard. So I share these stories just to shed light on how trauma and traumatic events and adverse childhood experiences can impact a young person and really, completely derail their lives. So I'm going to fast forward the story. So yeah, I got married and moved to the U.S., but the day before I left to the U.S., I was tethered to an IV tube in the hospital because that's how desperately dehydrated I would get just from throwing up because of my panic attacks and not be. I lived in constant fear that I was going to die, that I was going to have a heart attack and that I was going to die, right? No
Goodness.
explanation whatsoever. And at that point, the doctors were telling my parents, oh, she's just homesick. She's scared to leave her home and her country. All, to a certain extent, not, rational explanations, but never really completely helped any of us understand the picture or help me heal from what it is that I was struggling with.
Mhm.
So I'll fast forward the story. I moved here to Portland, Oregon, and for about a year and a little over a year, there was a little respite from all those symptoms. My husband and I, we traveled the country, got to know each other, and it was a nice break. It was wonderful. And then I got pregnant with our first daughter and postpartum depression. Not that I knew what that was. All I remember was being so excited to have this baby that I had wanted for so long. And we named her Radiance. And as this little baby grew radiant by the day, I grew despondent by the minute. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't function. I would, be agitated. I would cry all the time. And yes, there were suicidal thoughts. I was scared that I was going to inadvertently harm the baby, which made me even more scared of myself. And then, this constant thought that my child and my family would be better off without me, that I was
Mm.
crazy. And if I even shared what was going on in my head with my husband or his parents who were visiting at the time, they would be convinced that I was crazy and they were going to take my child away anyway. So I really had lost all hope. Fortunately, my husband was due for a sabbatical at Intel, his first, and so we all decided that a trip home to India would heal me of all my troubles. I mean, who wouldn't go home to mom and dad, get pampered, and you're going to be fixed all right? But that's really not how it worked at all. Days after I landed in India for my first visit home with my baby, I was severely suicidally depressed. I think, just the stress of all that accumulated stress, and just depression. It's lethal when you don't
Yeah.
address it. And the lack of understanding on my family's part of what I'd endured, and the pressure to show me and the new baby off when I got home was so high, so great, so intense that my parents loved me to pieces, but they just couldn't understand what was going on with me. And so I had my first major breakdown. And within 2 weeks of landing in India, I'd lost about 15 pounds.
My
And I
goodness.
was severely suicidally depressed. And now I was acting on the suicidal ideation. And it is at that point that my mother rushed me back to that same family physician, who, now it's about 7.5 years later, in less than a few minutes, he told my mother, "You need to rush her to a psychiatrist today. I can't help her here." And my mother did. And I still remember sitting in the psychiatrist's office with my mother. She was pulling her sari over her head and whispering into my ears, "Gayu, if only anybody sees us here, anybody, our lives are over.
Oh my goodness.
Nobody is going to respect our family from here on out." And I remember, those words and looking at my mother and being so ashamed of myself for, destroying their dreams, and not just destroying their dreams, but really dishonoring them and generations of my family to come, because that is what I was told. That's what my culture had taught me about mental illness. And yet again, within minutes, the doctor had a diagnosis of clinical depression and rushed me into ECTs, electroconvulsive therapy, shock treatments, antidepressants, and psychotherapy, and all of that. And parallel to that, my in-laws, who are a very loving but very traditional, family, very superstitious and religious family, invited a priest to come home to exorcise the demons in me, and he molested me. Yet again, I remember laying there in bed, completely catatonic, mute with grief, mute with rage, mute with helplessness. Who would they believe? Me, a diagnosed mad woman, a crazy woman, or a man of God? Again, I share these stories because these are not uncommon experiences. I am not the only one that has experienced these kind of traumas. And this is why we need to break the silence and we need to start the conversation about mental health. But I still didn't have the courage at that time to speak
Hmm.
up and seek help. I remember returning from India after that trip completely broken. Uh, and I remember the day before we left India, my husband and I went to the psychiatrist and requested a letter for continuity of care here. And in that letter, the psychiatrist had mentioned that he had treated my father for depression and suicidal ideation the year before.
Oh my goodness.
Again, a story that highlights the generational aspect, um, generational trauma, silence, shame when it comes to mental illness in our world. And I remember feeling so betrayed at how my father, the person that loved me so dearly, could not have confided in me of his pain, because I do believe that we could have comforted each other, if nothing else, to know that there's one more person in the world that understood our pain.
Mm.
But he didn't, and he couldn't, not until, just a couple of years before he passed away. And that again is the reality of what happens within families, and a reason why we need to break the silence as families and talk about mental health at our dinner tables, at our parties, at just at our yeah there's just such a desperate need to talk about it. But the
Hmm.
turning point in my life really came several years after I came back from that trip to India and started living like a prisoner in my own home. And back then we might have even crossed paths, Kerry, but you would have never known what it is that I was going through, because I had to put on that facade of normalcy. So
Yeah.
I believe that my family and I could live with dignity, the dignity that all human beings deserve, and not the stigma, not the discrimination, not the dehumanization of people. But it nearly killed me. I became pregnant again, um, by accident, and still had no understanding of the correlation between my depression and my the depressive cycles and the pregnancy cycles and my hormonal cycles and all of that. And I became very, very suicidally depressed again, tried several times to end my life, and fortunately did not succeed. But the last time, well, that last time, I have had other suicidal attempts after that. But that time, finally, I was at a point where I had a 2-year-old little girl and I was pregnant again. And I had absolutely no support because nobody knew what I was going through. Yes, I
Yes.
had access to a psychiatrist and therapist, but the stigma of mental illness, creates such deep shame and isolation in a
Yeah.
person's life that medical treatment alone is never going to heal you.
And that is
And I
such a burden to carry on top of what
feel
you're already
huge,
experiencing.
incredibly difficult barrier to overcome. So here I am, mother of a 2.5-year-old, pregnant again, completely suicidally, helplessly in despair. And finally, the realization that I need help. And I choose to go to my therapist. And um, I remember her sitting me down and saying, I'm sorry, I can't keep you alive. It's your responsibility. You have a disease that's going to compel you to take your life. But from where I see an incredibly strong woman who has the courage and the strength inside of her to educate herself and to empower herself about depression as a health condition, not as what you've been told in your culture or by the world around you. You're not possessed, you're not evil, you're not a demon, you have a health condition, and I highly recommend you go get hospitalized and start educating and empowering yourself of how to take care of yourself. And I promise you, you have the strength inside of you to recover. I remember sitting in her office there and going, how am I going to do it? What am I going to say to my friends? Will they respect me? Will they judge me? And yet I didn't have a choice. I remember sitting there promising myself that day that from that moment on, I will speak my truth. I will tell everyone in this world my story.
Yes.
And I was terrified, but I had no other choice. So I remember
Yes.
going and telling one of my best friends and dropping my little girl off at her house and begging her to take care of her while I was in the hospital. And I was comforted by the therapist because she told me that I was not going to get confined. I was not going to get locked up because from all the media, the movies that I'd seen, the articles that I'd ever read, what I knew was that people with mental illness like myself get locked up in
Yeah.
mental hospitals.
And hold that thought for a moment. I want people to hear the rest of this story because it's very important for people to understand what has happened to some people and how things can change. But we're going to take a short break right now, and then we'll be right back. So, just to let everyone know, you're listening to A Spirited Exchange with me, host Kerry Cadambi, and today's guest, Gayathri Ramprasad. And when we come back, we're going to continue this discussion about cultivating a state of mental well being in the time of COVID and sharing some personal strategies. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. Hello, we're back on A Spirited Exchange with me, host Kerry Cadambi, and today's guest, Gayathri Ramprasad. And we're talking about mental health and how to cultivate mental well being in the time of COVID. But before we dive back into your story, Gayatri, could you share where people can find out more about you and your organization? Can you share with our
Absolutely.
listeners?
Absolutely. We welcome everyone to come visit us, ASHA International, at myasha.org.
And ASHA is spelled.
myasha.org.
Okay, great. And also, Gayatri is offering a copy of her book. It's a paperback, right? A real book, not an ebook.
Yeah.
So the first person to call in will receive a copy of that book, and it is 1-800-930-2819. You can call in. Again, it's 1-800-930-2819. So Gayatri, we had to take a break during your story, and I'd really like you to continue where we had stopped.
Well, we were, I was at a point where I was at the psych ward. I had chosen to get hospitalized, and despite, the my therapist having comforted me that I will not be confined in the isolation cell because I was actually voluntarily checking into the hospital.
And
Um,
this was in the US.
this was here at the
Yes.
Urban Health and Science University Hospital, OHSU, here in Portland.
Mhm.
It wasn't so, though, because I had believed in my heart that here in America, the land of the free, that I would be treated with more dignity, but I was wrong. After the initial intake, because I was suicidal, I was confined in the seclusion room. And I remember being absolutely traumatized by it, you know, um, and somehow trying to make sense of it all at how a healthcare system can confine somebody when they are in a state of deep trauma and pain instead of comforting them with compassion. I didn't understand how this could have been compassionate care. Nonetheless, I did find my inner strength and was set out within a couple of days. I was transitioned into out of the seclusion room and into the ward. But unfortunately, I had a miscarriage, which only worsened my depression and my suicidal ideation. And this time, I really had no reason to live at all. I believed, because I not only shamed my family, but getting admitted into a mental hospital. There are two measures, I believe, for Indian women: marriage and motherhood, and I destroyed them both. And
Mm,
so I remember being distraught and wanting to die, and got confined in the seclusion room again, twice,
mhm.
for the second time within 10 days.
Wow.
And this time, as traumatic as it was life transforming. For the first time, I began asking questions that I had long buried in my heart. Am I crazy, or is the world around me crazy? Is psychiatric care therapeutic or traumatic?
Mhm,
And most importantly, what is the purpose of my life? And that day, I promised that for every day that I had lived in despair, I would transform my pain into purpose and give hope to people like myself around the world. I had no idea how I would realize that promise, but I've had incredible angels along that way, along my life's journey, to make sure that I brought that promise alive. It took a long time, but one of those angels was a stranger who came to meet me in the hospital. She was my husband's boss's mother-in-law's friend. She was visiting.
Truly an angel for that
Truly an angel.
connection
Her
to
name
make
was
it.
Aida, and I always call her Aida the angel. She was visiting my husband's boss from LA and had heard about my struggles and had insisted on coming to see me. And as ashamed as I was to, see her at first, I decided I had to, because in the Indian culture, we believe our guests are our God. So even though I was in a psychiatric ward, I believed she was a God, that I couldn't turn her away. I could not
Mhm,
refuse to see her. Right?
mhm,
It's the best choice I've ever made. In the few minutes as she held me in her arms and shared her story about her own struggles with depression and her relentless pursuit of recovery, she gave me the gift of hope that changed my life forever. Because at that point in time, I had lost faith in God
mhm,
and religion and in science, because the therapy and the medications hadn't quite helped me.
mhm.
And I had lost faith in humanity, really, and in myself
Yeah.
as all. And here was a stranger who came into my life, and in the few minutes of sharing her truth, her story, completely transformed my life.
Mhm.
And I remember promising, all Ida wanted me was to promise her that I wouldn't kill myself, because
Wow.
she kept telling me, "You have no idea of the power inside of you. You have no idea how strong you are.
Mm.
Yes, it's going to be a difficult journey, but I know you have the power within you to
What a
recover and rebuild a beautiful, meaningful life for yourself and your family." So every day of my life, I'm paying Aida's gift of hope forward.
Yes. And yes, you're doing incredible work. It's, your story is this accumulation of like trauma after trauma and lack of connection, with others, and a lack of understanding of what mental health or mental illness is about. And that's so tragic and so traumatic. You are amazing that you have come this far and not only just healed yourself, but are making a big difference out in the world. in a very big way with ASHA International. And hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit about some programs that you have launched to make a difference in people's lives. And I think one of the biggest things I remember when you first created ASHA International, you were talking about bringing the mental illness out of the closet, like the mental health issue out of the closet. And, because even I know in India, there was a lot of shame around that. And even in the US, there is a lot of shame around that. And just like years ago, there was shame around saying that someone had cancer, and that has shifted. And now, with your work and other changes in our society, it's becoming better understood and reducing the amount of shame. But there's still work to be done, and I'm grateful that you're doing this.
Well, thank you.
So
There's a
thank
lot,
you.
yes, we've come a long way, but there's a lot of work yet to be done. And especially now, with the COVID pandemic, the way it's impacting all of our health, mental, physical, social, every aspect of our health and well being.
Mhm.
Yes, it is difficult to talk about mental health, but now more than ever before, we not only need to talk about mental health, we not only need to share about our struggles openly and honestly without being, the fear of being judged or stigmatized.
Mhm.
We need to speak up and seek help.
Yes,
Our
absolutely.
lives depend on this.
Yes. So, in this with this pandemic going on, a lot of people are stressed, and those who already were having issues with mental conditions, and even some that aren't, are being pushed into imbalance in their mental well-being. And that's happening right now. And I'm wondering, if you can speak to what's happening now with this, and will there be any residual effects after the pandemic passes, and what's really being called forth to address this? If you can share
Yeah,
about that.
there's absolutely a lot of concern, yeah, about a second pandemic, if you will, at the heels of the coronavirus pandemic. And we should be alert, awakened, and ready to take action. When I get asked by people, do you think, that there's this mental health pandemic that's going to come at the heels of the coronavirus pandemic? And so I always tell people the mental health pandemic has always existed for centuries. It's only been exacerbated, heightened by the current coronavirus pandemic. So all of us, it takes all of us. It's not, we can't just lean on governments and public health, experts. They're all alerting us. And even,
Mhm.
yes, they're all alerting us, but Kerry, you and I, just two people, everyday ordinary citizens, do we experience stress and anxiety and despair and the whole spectrum of emotions from during this crisis? Yes, we do every
Mhm.
single day. And so all of us have mental health, and we need to nurture it, we need to take care of it every single day. So it's not a time to be distraught. It's a time for all of us to remain calm
Mhm.
and focus on how we can take care of ourselves.
Yeah, so in talking about how we can take care of ourselves, that self-care piece is just prime importance, because if we don't take care of ourselves and aren't well, we can't help others, can't help ourselves or help others. So, do you have any self-care? Let's talk a little bit about self-care, what that looks like, and what you do, what we each do for self-care.
Absolutely. I had created a self care practice over decades. Let's say at least 3 decades, and it had always sustained me, no matter what the ups and downs of my life had been. The pandemic threw a curveball. I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do all right. I've got my practice; it's going to be okay. Not really, just like any other human being in this world right now, it completely threw me off. It brought me to my knees. But yet again, proved, the need for self care. And for me, there's three things that have really helped me ground myself, center myself, and cope through this pandemic. And number one, it's self care. I start every morning, like I have for decades now, with pranayama. It's a form of deep. It's a school of deep breathing techniques that originated in my home country of India. And ironically, it was an American teacher that taught me how to practice pranayama. And so I practice breath work, deep breathing. for about 10 minutes first thing when I wake up in the morning, and followed by transcendental meditation, yet another practice, that originated in my home country of India. And then, I journal every single morning after my meditation, and follow up with, hydration and exercise at least 5 times a week, and proper nutrition. I love to cook. My husband loves to cook. So there's plenty good food to be,
You're an
sharing.
amazing cook. I can attest to that.
Thank you. The focus of making sure that you have connections, loving, supportive connections, and that you take the time. So, one thing that
Mhm.
I'm doing lately is to actually make it a point to reach out and connect to at least 3 people
Mm, mhm.
I love
Yeah.
and that I haven't heard from, or that I just want to reach out to and say, hey, how are you doing? Thinking about you, sending you love. Something as simple as that. It really
Mhm.
shifts my own mood first thing in the morning. And meaningful work. The second thing that's been say in terms of self care. Let's wrap that up. Sleep. My goodness, not only important, and yes, it's not always easy to fall asleep with everything that's you're hearing and seeing, and but still,
Mhm.
maybe for me it's reading a book, you know um,
Mhm.
going to bed and sharing 3 things I'm grateful for in the day with my husband, and for him to share that with me. And we talk to our daughters. I talk to my mother every day in India, same thing, touching base and saying, hey, what are we yes, let's talk about what's been stressing us out today, for sure,
Mhm.
because it's important to get that out.
Mhm.
But let's also come back to what are we grateful for each day, right? So the practice
Right.
of gratitude has been incredibly helpful to us.
Mhm.
Let's not forget joy. Maybe it's just working in my garden for a few minutes, or maybe it's looking at the squirrel running up and down the oak tree, as happy as you can be. Maybe it's that piece of chocolate before
Some
bedtime.
Sometimes it's those simple pleasures that can
It
make all the
is,
difference.
but being
Yes.
mindful, right? That I
Right.
can still do that,
Right.
still find
Yeah.
joy amidst all of this has been so important. So self-care, make self-care your priority.
Yeah.
That's my,
Absolutely.
in,
I
yeah.
Yeah, I also created a practice over a long period of time. And, like you, I have my morning practice. For me, it's self Reiki. I do Reiki work. And I also love to garden. We both have that very much in common. Getting the hands in the dirt is so helpful, kind of recentering for me. But one another thing about self care is like being gentle with myself when they have those moments where I'm not emotionally at my best, because sometimes that self judgment can really kick in. And it's like, no, recognize that this is a challenging time and to be kind to ourselves. And then, during the day, if I find that I'm having um, a thought that isn't the most helpful or a reaction to something, I have mind body modalities that help
Mhm.
for healing. And some of that is Reiki, some of it is modality called Psyche, which helps reprogram limiting beliefs or shift negative perceptions. And so I can do those at any time when I feel like I need that. And those will help me down regulate my nervous system and better manage my stress level. So, yeah, that self care is so important and makes a big difference in how we
Huge,
manage stress.
huge. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely huge difference. And like you were talking, to practice loving kindness.
Right.
Most of us are good at, being kind and loving to other people, but not
Yes.
ourselves.
It's
So,
got to start at home.
and, and that's definitely sure, for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. I am a perfectionist. Not that I want to be. I just am in many ways, and it's good. It's got its own, like they say, every blessing has a curse, and every curse has a blessing, right? It's a blessing in many ways because it pushes me, to pursue things and realize my dreams in ways that I would have never otherwise. But
Hmm.
the downfall of it is, not being very kind and loving towards myself. But so
Right.
it's a practice. So I try,
Yes.
and again, that's something that all of us, I think, especially now, should be practicing loving kindness towards
Absolutely.
ourselves and towards other people. And when I say, pursue meaning and purpose and meaning in your life, in addition to self care and to being loving and kind, it's whatever's giving us meaning. Because I hear
Yeah.
so many times lately, because of the transition, even in terms of work, from going to work to virtual workspaces, people are
Yes.
so stressed out, just screen time,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I know that you have some more things to share with us about how to cope during this time. But we're going to take another quick break and then we're going to come back because I'd like to continue this thread. Again, it's going to be very helpful for people who are all going through this pandemic with us. So it's time to take a short break. I'm Kerry Cadambi, and you're listening to A Spirited Exchange. And when we return, we'll share a little more practices about how to cope during this time of COVID and other challenging times. But before we break, Gayatri, can you share your contact information again with our listeners?
Yes. I would love for our listeners to reach out to us at myasha.org. That's M as in Mary, YASHA.org.
Great. Thank you, Gayatri. All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back. We're back on a spirited exchange with me, host Kerry Cadambi, and today's guest, Gayathri Ramprasad. And before we dive into the remainder of the episode, I want to take a brief moment just to let you know where you can find out more information about me and how I can help you unlock your full potential to live the life you desire. My website is thedivineguidancegift.com, where you'll find information about how to work with me online in private sessions or group programs. Now, we've been talking about the importance of self-care as a way to cultivate mental well-being, and we shared some of our own personal practices for self-care that help us cope at this time. But Gayatri, do you have any other suggestions of practices that can help others during this time, and what people can do to help themselves and even help others during this time?
Absolutely. Work, meaningful, purposeful work is every bit as important for our self care as all of the other aspects that we were talking about, all the other practices, and the practice of loving kindness, right? We are working beings, all of us, whether we're babies at play or adults at work. And when we find meaning and purpose in what we do, it can be the greatest healer. For example, all of our outreach through ASHA International is in person. And when the stay at home orders came to be, it came to a grinding halt.
Mm,
And it took my breath away. You know, yes, of course, I completely comply with what we need to stay home and save lives and completely comply with that. But I was lost without the work that I do in the community as a mental health advocate. And so I had to find, really, I had to sit and meditate on how it is that I'm going to find meaning and purpose in my days again. And fortunately for technology, what I learned was that while the walls are closing because we are all quarantined to be at home in some measure, technology has given us the gifts of creating a world, living in a world without walls. And
mhm,
so I had long wanted to launch a movement called My Story, My Superpower, because as I mentioned before, a stranger's story gave me the gift of hope and changed my life forever. And when I started ASHA International, it was with one wish that I would share my story to give hope to people like myself and empower them on their road to recovery and well-being. And for the first 10 years of ASHA International's life, I had the opportunity to travel around the world: India, Singapore, South Africa, Australia, across the US, across India, right?
mhm.
And all of a sudden, no travel, no outreach into
Yeah.
communities. And so, but I had gathered over 150 stories over these years. And so on May 1st, in celebration of Mental Health Awareness Month, we launched the My Story, My Superpower movement. And our hope is just as simple as the day it was when I started ASHA International, or the day that Aida gave me the gift of hope, that through these stories that we give hope to people in our world right now, right here, that are struggling with their mental health at this present time. Let them know that they're not alone. There is hope.
Mhm.
Encourage them to get the help. There is help available. And more than anything, right, self care is the best care. And through these stories, to share hope, stories, to inspire them about their own inner resilience and how to take care of themselves in this time. of me
Mhm.
and into the future. So yeah, just transforming our work from from in-person outreach to virtual, programming, which is still a work in progress, but even just focusing on that gave me so much meaning and purpose. And it continues to give me so much meaning and purpose to my days
Mhm.
that I invite everybody that are listening to us, whatever it is, maybe it is work. When we before the break we were talking about how many people who have transitioned from going to work to working online are burned out just with all the screen time and the complexity of a virtual work life, and they're saying it's no longer fun, it's not, it's not meaningful, it's stressful. And so
Mhm.
to them I say, I understand. Perhaps you can find a new hobby. Perhaps you can just sit and be and find meaning in that, find gratitude that you can breathe, you can listen, you can see, you can smell, you can feel, you can hear, right? So
Yeah.
finding meaning in the most minute ways that we take for granted every day, which is magical, by the way.
Yeah, the
They're
smallest,
looking
simplest
small.
acts,
Yeah, they're looking
can
small and
be
simple.
life-giving. You think of, like, the Zen masters and,
Right.
just the zen of sweeping, just to be really present with something and,
Yes. Yes.
yes,
And
just
so I believe we can all find meaning and joy in the simplest ways, because even the most simplest thing is
mm.
magnificent. The
And
ability.
even if, as you had talked about reaching out, that you make a point to reach out to 3 people,
Yes.
uh, that reaching out, you may not realize at the time or maybe even after what a big difference that has made to someone's day or their whole week. And so it may seem like something small and inconsequential to you, but it may mean everything to someone else. And so to be open to even the smallest things may
Yeah.
be big in some way.
And I know the impact of, the incredible impact people are making when they reach out to me. you know I
Mm,
love hearing from my friends and my colleagues and people that I work with, who are just not just here in Portland but around the world. It just reminds me that we're connected,
mhm.
we're together,
Yeah,
even in this time of needing to be socially distanced in so many ways, that there's
right.
nothing that can break the bonds between us, and that gives me
Yes,
hope, that gives me strength.
right. And that connection allows us to recognize how similar what we all have in common. And I have to say that the stories that you have, the My Story, My Superpower program movement that's on your website, people can go and read these stories and they're organized by, can you talk about how they're
Yeah,
organized on?
absolutely. So we've got a collection of over 150 stories, and they're organized by diagnosis,
Mm,
by age group, whether youth or adult, and also by country. And really, in the process of launching this movement, I had to go and watch the stories myself, so I could actually, help with the organization of the stories. And initially, it sounded like, like, oh my god, how am I going to do this, right? 150 stories, and then
and they're videotaped.
they're all
They're,
videos,
yes.
yes. And but once I got into it, it is the greatest gift I could have given myself, because it reminded me of this connection that I've had with every one of these storytellers, and of the incredible resilience within each of us to overcome whatever the obstacles are in our life,
Mhm.
including the coronavirus pandemic.
Right.
Always believe that together we're stronger than any virus there can
Yes.
be, than any struggle that there can be. But we have to remember, together, we have to
Right.
reach out and love and support each other, not
And
just
I
today, but forever.
and I imagine that some of these stories, these people may become the Ida for someone else.
You're absolutely right, Carrie. There's somebody out there in the world that needs to listen to see that particular story. Perhaps you're somebody that has, survived abuse, sexual abuse. Perhaps, you have survived homelessness or any other trauma for that matter, or the loss of a loved one to suicide. And these stories remind us, true, these are painful, traumatic experiences,
Mhm.
but also resoundingly true, that with love, with connection, with support, we can overcome. anything, any day.
Yes. And you provide a lot of resources on your website as well for people who are seeking help, whether for themselves or for someone they know, a loved one,
Right.
whatever. So there's a lot there for people to help them.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Yeah. Um, so it's, I'm forever impressed with your mission. You know, you talked about one of the things that helps cope in the time of any time of struggle is to have a life of meaning and purpose. And you have turned the story of your pain of mental illness and everything that happened through that journey into this gift to the world to help others experience a connection, an understanding, to 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 really eliminate this element of shame about talking about mental health. Um, so I love that you have normalized. You have your I think part of your mission has been to normalize the conversation about mental illness.
Yeah, and thank you. And in stories, again, I believe have incredible power, right? Not only do they connect us, let us know that we're not alone, that we're in this together, no matter what the struggle is, they give us hope to survive and to cope and to thrive. So stories have all historically we are us, human beings are people of stories, more than
Mm,
any statistic in the world. It's the story that connects us, that comforts us, that inspires us and ignites us, and both personally and socially. And so when I started in ASHA International, with that humble wish of just reaching just one person and sharing my story to give them hope, I am so grateful today. We've reached more than 60,000 people,
my
and we've
goodness.
just begun, right? Because it's because of these incredibly brave people that are standing up and sharing their stories and normalizing mental
Hmm.
health as part of holistic health. And
Hmm.
that is what's so important. And for me, at a personal level, the greatest gift is to see my two daughters growing in a household and in a community where they're not afraid to talk about mental health as part of whole health, right? I mean, in fact, my
Hmm.
daughters remind me, it's like, why do you have to, separate mental health? You should just say health. You know?
Of body, mind, and spirit.
Correct,
It's
correct.
like,
So yeah, even the conversation you and I are having today,
Mhm.
Kerry, is going to go far in normalizing the conversation and integrating
I
what
do hope
health
so.
and well-being really means, right? It is the integration of
Yes.
physical health and mental health and emotional health and social health and environmental health and all the other aspects of health. We are an integrated whole. So I really thank you for taking time to have this conversation. And I hope we can inspire people to start, conversations about mental health at their own dinner tables tonight and for every night into the future, because
Absolutely.
we can save lives.
Yes. Yes. I believe you're already saving lives and you're continuing to do that. And I'm so grateful that you were able to join us today and share your story and share your purpose and your work in the world to the benefit of everyone out there. So I want to thank you for that. And as we're wrapping up right now, unfortunately, I would love to continue this conversation, but maybe another time.
Maybe not.
So I would like to thank our guest, Gayathri Ramprasad, for sharing her light, her wisdom, and her grace with us today. I have so enjoyed our time together, and I'm grateful for all that you have shared here that's going to be so helpful to our audience.
Thank you, Kerry.
Yep.
Namaste.
Namaste. I also want to thank all the fabulous listeners who've tuned in today with open, curious, and receptive minds, eager to awaken to your own personal evolution. My question for you today is this: how will you choose to practice loving kindness in the world today? And how will you choose to make a difference? Thank you for joining us. Please join me every second and fourth Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 6 p.m. Central, and 7 p.m. Eastern. My next show will be on May 27th at 4 p.m. So tune in to explore and engage the power of your own evolution to live a joyful and purpose driven life. Have a great week, a couple weeks, and I will see you back here next time.